Story 1. Quick backstory. Entitled brother and I were raised in a semi-traditional household where boys are revered and girls are frowned upon and considered irrelevant, burdens, and overall disappointments. This resulted in a spoiled, coddled entitled brother, and to quote a phrase from Willy Wonka, "A kid can't spoil himself, you know?" Entitled brother grew up with a parent-paid post-secondary education along with residence, tuition, books, and meals all paid for since parents didn't want him to distract himself with a job while pursuing his Bachelor of Arts. Throughout the post-secondary years, it was becoming evident that entitled brother was using our parents more like a bank than anything. No calls or visits unless he needed money, At first, parents obliged. But they slowly started to realize the entitled monster they raised, so they started cutting him off. He then began a relationship with sister-in-law, who was 5 months pregnant at the time with someone else's child, this is important, and threatened to quit school so he could help her raise the child. Because our dad was paying for his schooling, he basically told entitled brother, "Over my dead body," and that if he wanted to quit, then he'd be on the hook for all of the tuition up to that point. Entitled brother got angry and moved out, and got a job doing low-end retail. Finished his Bachelor of Arts, and gave up an amazing job in his field of study to support sister-in-law and kid 1. Kid 2 didn't come along until perhaps 3 years later. Dad. Our dad fell very ill to stomach cancer, and the prognosis was not good. At the time of diagnosis, he was given approximately 3 months. During these 3 months, entitled brother still would only come by the house when he needed money, and only stuck around long enough until he either received a check or was told no. It was more often the latter. Never even asked how dad was doing. After dad passed away almost exactly 3 months later, the first thing entitled brother asks our mother was if dad had a life insurance policy. Entitled brother's presence was not welcome after that, and even though he attended the funeral service, he left quickly after making his obligatory appearance. Roman 2 Mom. Approximately 2 weeks after Dad's funeral, I came home from work one day to find Mom sitting with Dad's good friend George, who was also a life insurance broker. Curious, I asked her what the purpose of George's visit was, especially so recently after Dad passed away. She explained to me that she applied for a policy for herself, for $500,000. I was floored. Mom, I don't mean to sound pessimistic, but there is no way you'll qualify for such a policy. Your health isn't terrific. You're diabetic, have heart disease and high blood pressure. Mom, smiling, don't worry. Just make sure your brother knows, but not until the time is right. Okay, Mom, sounded kind of cryptic, but whatever. Same situation all over again. Entitled brother didn't come visit Mom after Dad passed away, unless he needed money, and over again, nothing was given to him. I don't know what hurt her more, the fact that her husband of 40+ years was gone, or that her only son was treating her poorly. Entitled brother would try to bully her, saying that she doesn't care about her only grandchild and that she's depriving him of a decent childhood, etc. And sister-in-law would try to chime in at the same time. It was horrible. 4 weeks after this encounter, Mom passed away from a heart attack and stroke. I could barely think. I was in so much grief and shock at the thought of losing both parents within 6 weeks. After signing the appropriate paperwork at the hospital, entitled brother said he would drive me home. I had in my possession our mom's personal effects clothes, jewelry, purse, etc. On the way home, he asked the most unbelievable question. Entitled brother, "Hey, did Mom have any money in her purse? Kid needs food." I almost threw myself out of the car doing 50 miles per hour. Without a word, I looked in her purse and fished out a $20 bill and flung it at him. Then the next thing out of his mouth. Entitled brother, did Mom have a life insurance policy? Bingo. That's what she was getting at back then. I guess the time is right. Right now, I thought. Yeah. She applied for a policy shortly after Dad died. I guess she wanted to make sure we were taken care of in case something happened. Entitled brother, really? How much? $500,000. The ride was silent for most of the way back. I swear I heard cha-ching coming from his direction. Part Roman 3: The Aftermath. Approximately a month after Mom's service, and yeah, it was a replay of Dad's where entitled brother would simply show and leave after making his obligatory appearance, again leaving his kid sister with the responsibility of the funeral and other tasks. I received a letter addressed to my mom. I opened it, and sure enough, it was from the insurance company. The very first paragraph started off with paraphrased, "We regret to inform you that you do not qualify for the aforementioned life insurance policy, etc." After talking to our trustee and executor, I was told either he or I could call to inform entitled brother. I volunteered to do it, so I called up entitled brother with the unfortunate news. Me, hey, entitled brother. Got a letter from Notarial Company Life about Mom's policy. Entitled brother, oh yeah, when do we get the check? Me, that's just it. She didn't qualify. It was a regrets letter. Entitled brother, get it through your head, she didn't qualify for the policy. All hell broke loose. Entitled brother, what about my kid? I can't afford to pay rent. He needs food, we need rent, we need to pay off our vacation. How could she do this to me? Sister-in-law then grabs the phone. You did this, didn't you? You're just jealous that you don't have kids. I was 22 at the time, engaged, working and going to school, and had zero interest in having children, and you just want all the money for yourself. Kid 1 needs this money for his education, and you're going to steal it from him. You would steal from your own nephew? You awful person, I'm going to sue. That money is ours. You don't deserve a single cent. What followed was a rather indignant and panicked call by entitled brother to our trustee and executor, who happened to be my mom's cousin. I later found out the life insurance guy was in on the prank. Remember, old friend of Dad's, simply to teach entitled brother and his wife a lesson he'd never forget. Apparently entitled brother racked up close to $40,000 in debt upon being told that Mom applied for this policy, spending money he didn't have yet was expecting to get. Turns out Mom and Dad, even though they showed zero faith in me while growing up, apparently had a different view as I got older and figured out I'd be okay if anything happened to them. They were right, especially since I moved back home to look after them after they both fell ill. Meanwhile, the pride they had in entitled brother had waned to the point where cutting him off financially didn't do any good, so Mom felt she had to play the ultimate revenge from the grave. Yeah, it affected him even more as an adult, and in a way Mom ended up punishing a monster she and Dad themselves created. So I do feel a little bad for him. But because he keeps finding new ways to try to cheat me and steal money from me, I feel bad only a little, just a little. Story 2. This is a story about someone I once considered a friend. To this day, he has no idea I was the one who exposed him, and I plan to keep it that way. The key players in this story are myself, badass pilot, girlfriend 1, girlfriend 2, girlfriend 3, young female pilot, and several others who help fill out the story. I witnessed most of this firsthand, but I've also included details from trusted sources who saw things when I wasn't around. I fully trust these accounts. As the name suggests, badass pilot is a pilot, but he doesn't work for an airline. He started teaching at a flight school in his 20s, but decided to strike out on his own because, as he told everyone, he could do it better. He spent the next few years trying to destroy the reputation of his former employer. He was a likable guy, and many people thought highly of him, including me. When he started out, he was struggling driving a beat-up car, getting evicted for not paying rent, and lacking an office. But people liked him and helped him set up his own flight school. Some even fixed things up for him. Every now and then, people would get upset because he mistreated others, but his friends always defended him. He was charismatic, told entertaining stories, though often exaggerated or false, and knew how to charm people. He was known for his wild antics and throwing good parties. At the time, he had a girlfriend 1, who was pretty awesome. She wasn't difficult or high maintenance, and even threw him a huge 30th birthday party. But while he was with her, he was constantly flirting with other women when she wasn't looking. I witnessed him love bomb women, especially those in vulnerable positions, such as after a breakup. He'd tell them girlfriend one had cheated on him, or that they were on a break, sleep with them, then ghost them and claim they were crazy when they tried to reach him. For instance, after cheating on girlfriend one with one woman, he told his friends at the police department that she was stalking him, and they contacted her to make her stop. He also started spreading rumors about girlfriend one, making up stories about how awful she was. Despite being in a relationship most people would envy, he talked poorly about her behind her back. This was his pattern of behavior. When he and girlfriend one finally broke up, he told everyone that she had cheated on him, flipping the truth. He even blamed her for his poor performance in an interview for his dream job, saying he was an emotional wreck after discovering her infidelity. His story didn't add up, but he told it to anyone who would listen, and people believed him. After the breakup, he spiraled, drinking heavily, partying, and hitting on every woman in sight. He was a wreck, and many of us watched as he nearly destroyed his life. But a few months later, he got involved with one of his students, girlfriend two, and quickly moved in with her. She helped him get back on track, and soon he landed a great gig flying corporate charters. His personality helped him secure a sweet contract as a private pilot for a billionaire, which he bragged about endlessly. He started making good money, bought a new car, and moved into a nice house. His flight school became more family-friendly, and girlfriend two even helped with the school. Then, he received a prestigious offer from the Federal Aviation Administration to become a pilot examiner. This role was reserved for highly experienced and respected pilots, and it came with a lot of power and money since examiners could charge high fees for licenses. Badass Pilot was thrilled and bragged about how easy the money was, even saying it was like printing money tax-free because students had to pay in cash. But despite all his success, Badass Pilot hadn't changed. He continued to brag about being the best instructor, while putting down other flight schools and telling embarrassing stories about his students and friends. He also started bad-mouthing girlfriend two, spreading false stories about her. But I didn't take much notice at the time because it seemed like just more of his loud, boastful behavior. However, one day, I overheard him talking about me behind my back, completely fabricating a story about an embarrassing situation I'd confided in him about. He twisted it into something much worse, potentially damaging my reputation and career. That was when I realized he wasn't a true friend. Badass Pilot had ruined others' careers by using his industry contacts to sabotage them. He would call companies and tell them not to hire certain people, often out of jealousy or revenge. He also liked to make people feel sorry for him, constantly bringing up his tough childhood and troubled home life, even though he was now an adult in his late 30s. Despite appearing more stable with girlfriend two, he hadn't changed his ways with women. He flirted aggressively with women, especially young and impressionable ones. One incident involved the receptionist next door to his flight school, a young woman around 18 or 19 years old. She had no idea about girlfriend two and had left a flirty voicemail for Badass Pilot. Girlfriend two played the message for him, and he pretended to be clueless about why the young woman would leave such a message. Instead of owning up to his behavior, he retaliated by complaining to the airport manager, getting the young receptionist fired. Seeing how dangerous he could be to those who crossed him, I knew I had to be careful. I decided to stay close to gather more information. I acted like nothing had happened, spent more time at the flight school, and eventually found the opportunity to snoop through his files. That's when I discovered the jackpot. Badass Pilot was logged into all his accounts on his desktop, email, messaging, everything. It was all right there. He was a serial offender when it came to inappropriate relationships. His messaging history was full of explicit content, photos, videos, and more. I copied everything. I took photos, recorded videos, and saved as much evidence as I could before someone came back, forcing me to stop. I enlisted the help of another pilot who had also been wronged by Badass Pilot, and we meticulously went through the evidence. We identified the people involved, sorted them into categories, and discovered that he had even engaged in inappropriate behavior with some of his own students. This made him completely unfit to be a Federal Aviation Administration examiner. Knowing that his behavior compromised his ability to objectively evaluate pilots, we decided to send an anonymous package of evidence to the Federal Aviation Administration. However, nothing happened. The Federal Aviation Administration didn't take any action. We then reached out to a young female pilot who had tried to stop Badass Pilot when he crossed the line with her. She refused to come forward, fearing that she be blacklisted or discredited, especially since the Federal Aviation Administration had already ignored our anonymous report. She believed Badass Pilot would destroy her career, and I couldn't blame her for being cautious. In 2018, I decided to take matters into my own hands. One day, I was using an iPad at the flight school while girlfriend 2 sat behind the desk. Badass Pilot was texting her, and since he was logged into the iPad, I could see his messages. I also saw that he had been texting someone else the night before, sending inappropriate videos to a student. I took more pictures for evidence and handed the iPad to girlfriend 2 with the texting still open. 10 minutes later, girlfriend 2 left the school, and I knew she was on her way home to confront him. She owned the house they lived in, so she immediately moved his things out. He started sleeping at the flight school, looking disheveled and homeless for a while. I also anonymously informed his billionaire employer and made sure girlfriend 2 knew about all his inappropriate activities. Young female pilot kept in touch with other female pilots, but none of them were willing to come forward publicly, fearing the same backlash as before. By 2019, despite everything, the Federal Aviation Administration had actually increased Badass Pilot's responsibilities. Frustrated, we convinced girlfriend 2 to post a factual Yelp review about his behavior, which quickly spread throughout the aviation community. Badass Pilot went into damage control mode, trying to get the review removed and harassing girlfriend 2. Eventually, he managed to get it taken down. But our persistence paid off. The Federal Aviation Administration finally launched an investigation. Badass Pilot lost all his examiner privileges, and the Federal Aviation Administration shut down his flight school's testing center. He is now barred from any affiliation with the Federal Aviation Administration. And although the general public may not know, everyone in the aviation industry is aware of his downfall. As for me, I'm back to enjoying my time at the airport. Badass Pilot has been knocked down a peg, but some people still don't care about his past behavior. However, I take comfort in knowing he no longer has the power he once did, and I get a small sense of satisfaction whenever he tries to explain why he's no longer a Federal Aviation Administration examiner, blaming it on high liability insurance. Meanwhile, girlfriend 3 is still by his side, unaware that history is likely repeating itself. I've tried to warn her anonymously, but for now, I'm just watching the story unfold again. Story 3. I work in the United Kingdom for a large technology company doing software support. I'm part of a team that has members all over the world. I've been in this job for around 10 years, and other than the major issues I've had with this guy, I truly enjoy my job. When I started with the company, I wouldn't say that I was green. I had about 7 years of industry experience under my belt. I was definitely inexperienced with the company, but the job that I had been hired to do used technologies that I was more than comfortable with. The point I'm trying to convey here is that I wasn't completely oblivious to all of the applications supported by our company. Everyone in my team, around 30 of us, was very nice and was very keen to help except for Shane. Shane is probably what you'd term as the team guru, about 5 years from retirement. Part of the office furniture metaphorically, as we are all home workers. He'd been with the company for nearly 40 years. Everyone labeled Shane as the only guy to go to when you were truly in a bind. When I was initially starting out, I did indeed find that Shane was highly knowledgeable and more often than not had the answers to whatever obscure questions you might have. Things were great, and our team ticked over nicely. I got to know the rest of the team well over phone over time too, and my best friend was a woman named Mel. She was of a similar age and experience level to Shane, and in my opinion was just as knowledgeable as him. One day Mel and I were on a brief call chatting about a work issue. When we got to shooting the breeze for a while, we talked about ourselves and also the team. I'd said that I hadn't met anyone face to face yet, and that was when she told me she'd once met Shane in person a couple of years ago. They are both based in the United States, I'm in the United Kingdom, and both got invited to a tech conference in New York. She told me that he has serious health issues due to his weight around 450 pounds, and when he was home was often on oxygen and medication. His plan was to ride things out until he was able to take early retirement so that he didn't need to worry about paying for his medical insurance anymore. That sounded like a reasonable enough plan to me, and we were soon talking about something else. The issues started about 2 years into my tenure with the company. We started moving in a new direction with what applications we were going to be offering to customers, and towards that end we were trained in a bunch of new stuff. I saw this as a great opportunity and equalizer. If no one on our team had any experience with this new software, then I would be on equal footing with everyone. This went really well for me, and I put a lot of time and effort into learning as much as possible. Shane didn't show much interest in the new stuff. He still continued to spend most of his time with the legacy tools. In team meetings, you could clearly tell he was getting upset that his status as a guru was gradually becoming more and more meaningless. This wasn't anything personal. We work in software. You have to adapt in order to remain competitive. As time went on, it was becoming clear to the team how much work I was putting in, and I was well on the way to becoming the go-to guy for the new software. During this time, Shane would start sniping at me for anything he could plausibly manage. For example, if I was late to a team meeting because a customer call overran, he'd make sure to interrupt whatever was being said to comment something like, "Oh look, Ortis Deluxe has bothered to grace us with his presence," even though he'd been guilty of the same in the past. Things like email chains to almost anything I sent out that included him and our boss on an email. He would reply with some unrelated complaint or observation completely irrelevant to what was actually being discussed. One day Mel called me and asked me what my issue with Shane was. I truthfully told her that I had no issue at all with him, and he just seemed to have it in for me. She said that if she managed to find anything out, she'd let me know. Things continued like this for a couple of years. I continued to be the go-to guy, and he continued to try and discredit me, and generally paint me in as bad a light as possible. One day we had a major incident, one that literally could have cost the company millions in service-level agreement fines if it was not solved quickly. Our manager split us into teams to troubleshoot specific areas, and she paired me up with Shane. I wasn't happy about it, but whatever, I was a professional. We got on a call and started working through the issue. As our call progressed, it was becoming abundantly clear why he didn't like me. He knew nothing about the new application. He hadn't done any work on it at all. Everything I asked him to check, he needed hand-holding even for the most basic of tasks. Eventually, I just shared my screen and said for him to watch me. I went into the guts of the system, through so many logs explaining to him what I was doing the whole time, and eventually found the problem was with a recent patch we had installed. At this point, he dropped from the call. I didn't think anything of this at the time. We use Skype for business, and it can be flaky, so I just continued what I was doing. Our process was not to roll back any changes until it had been approved by the senior manager. As I was the one responsible for deploying rolling back patches, I made some notes about what we needed to do, and then rejoined the main call. I wasn't worried at all because bad patches happened every so often. They just didn't usually have this level of impact. As soon as I did, I got absolutely lambasted by the incident manager. Apparently Shane had returned to the group call and informed everyone present that the outage was caused by an error that I had made in the deployment process, and that Shane had told me what the correct fix was, and I had refused to implement it then and there. I was furious. He had accurately told them the cause of the problem, because it was me who literally demonstrated to him how to find it. I had even foolishly mentioned to him what I thought would fix the problem, because of how long he'd been with the company compared to me. Only our immediate team knew the truth about who was really the better skilled person in this situation. His historical reputation still carried a lot of weight with people who didn't work day to day with him. Because this incident was so major, over 100 people were on this call, several of them 2 or 3 levels of management above our team. He made me out to be a reckless, incompetent idiot, and he was believed. Despite my manager's protestations, I was disciplined and given a verbal warning. He meanwhile was congratulated for steering the company away from a potential disaster and given a commendation. I was so angry, and a while later Mel gave me a call. Apparently Shane had been bragging to her about putting that smart elect punk in his place. She was shocked and asked him what he was talking about. His real beef was that he thought I had disrespected him by trying to take over his role as go-to guy for the new software. That wasn't my intention at all. I didn't see it as my fault that he was too lazy to do the work again. I lamented with Mel that she should have recorded the call. She laughed and said that Skype shows when you're recording a call, and he'd never have spilled his guts while being recorded. I immediately had a brainwave. I decided that I would confront Shane one-on-one. I pinged him on Skype and said that I wanted to talk. He responded with a smiley and just said, "Sure." I called him and let him know that I was recording this call, and the Skype notification popped up to let all participants know that this call was being recorded. I went right for it and accused him of lying about the major incident and said that it seemed like he had a major issue with me. As expected, he lied and said that he was sorry that I felt like I had to react this way. He said that he would need to talk to our boss about it. I said wait 1 second and turned off the Skype recorder. I then said that Skype isn't recording and that he knew exactly what he had done. His mask slipped at this point, and he said that he was perfectly within his rights to put me in my place. He said that you need to respect the longer-serving people in jobs like this, and that he would do it again in a heartbeat. I didn't hold back. I called him a dinosaur who refused to move with the times and wanted to coast out his days here without doing any work. He said that he was a couple of years away from retirement, and he'd be darned if he was going to bust his behind for some shiny new software. I said to him, speaking of new software, has he heard of Open Broadcaster software? Of course he hadn't, and I suggested he Google it. I then hung up on him. Not long after, the messages started. He was begging me not to use the secret recording that I had taken. He said that if he gets fired, he will lose his retirement package and his medical benefits. I told him to go away, and that he should have considered that before trying to get me fired. I passed all of this on to the relevant channels before really giving it any thought. Things set in motion, and sure enough, a few weeks later, after a company investigation, he was fired. I heard from Mel that he had asked to take early retirement so as to keep his benefits, but this was apparently rejected. It all came out later that apparently he had significant debts, and that he was counting on his retirement package to keep him financially afloat. With no job and no package, he had no money to pay for the medical treatment which he badly needed. He was in no state to get himself a new job, and his skills had stagnated so badly that he couldn't even get a new job online. Mel told me that he died about 6 months after this whole incident due to his ongoing health issues. I felt conflicted about this for a while. Sharing that recording obviously contributed to his death, but I don't know how bad I feel about it. I am a young guy trying to build my career, and he actively tried to destroy me. I should maybe have held off when he pleaded for me not to reveal the truth, but he was old enough and wise enough to not engage in the childish games he played. If I'd known he'd be dead as a result of this, I'd maybe have done things differently. It's one that stays with me, that's for sure. I'm still at the company, and I can tell you all that I will never treat a new employee the way he treated me. So maybe the breaking of that cycle is the positive to come out of all this. Story 4. This story is one of my own and happened about 20+ years ago. We had just moved to a better neighborhood, into a nicer house in a quiet cul-de-sac. It was a planned community where people eventually expanded and customized their homes. We had 3 neighbors, and the one behind our yard had an intruder alarm that would randomly go off at all times of the day, probably due to a poorly positioned sensor or an electrical fault. The owner of this property decided to build a large veranda on the top floor of his house. To do this, he constructed a wall adjoining the boundary wall to our house, with an open upper section facing our backyard, where metal bars were installed to deter burglars. This detail will be important later. The alarm buzzer was mounted on a column near these metal bars, close enough that it could be reached from our property and probably from the adjoining property as well. One beautiful sunny day, my dad was cooking lunch or dinner. Since it was such a nice day, he had already enjoyed a few beers. Suddenly, the neighbor's alarm started going off again. Frustrated, my dad, who had already warned the neighbor to fix the alarm, told me 12 years old at the time and my brother who was 6 to take care of it by cutting the wires. "Forget the neighbor," he said. "I've told him to fix that blasted alarm already." Being the obedient kids we were, we obliged. I grabbed a pair of sharp scissors with insulated handles, and with me holding my brother up, he carefully cut one of the wires. And just like that, peace was restored, except for Dad's usual tunes playing in the background, ranging from Donna Summer to Queen, as he liked to do after a few drinks. A couple of days later, a federal police officer knocked on our door. It turned out that the neighbor was a federal highways officer, and this was his boss, investigating the tampering of the neighbor's alarm. When asked, Dad denied knowing anything about it, but took the opportunity to raise a complaint about the constant noise. "That alarm is disturbing the peace," he said. The officer explained that noise complaints were handled by the state police, which prompted Dad to reveal that he was a state trooper on medical leave at the time. He added, "I've already told him to fix that alarm, but he hasn't taken it seriously. Do I need to report him?" Words were exchanged, and soon after, the neighbor moved his alarm buzzer to the front of the house. But it didn't end there. He eventually received a town fine for a noise violation, thanks to an anonymous tip from a concerned citizen. I wonder who that could have been. Story 5. I worked at a call center for a collection agency for nearly 5 years. Anyone who has worked in this type of environment knows there are various performance targets that need to be met, whether they're daily, monthly, or otherwise. One of our targets was to make a certain number of calls per day, about 120. Naturally, the more contact you had with debtors, the less time there was to make additional calls. It usually wasn't an issue, but some days you'd make more contacts than others, and occasionally your call count would end up being only 2/3 of what it should be. We received regular updates on our call count, and our manager would let us know if we were on track. At the end of the day, they would provide the final results. What frustrated me was that even after a successful day where I collected debts and generated revenue for the company, the manager would still focus on my call count. Any attempt to explain, "Sure, I didn't meet the call count, but look at the revenue I brought in today," fell on deaf ears. It didn't matter if I had a successful day or had spent considerable time on the phone trying to collect. The target had to be met. I even asked managers to review my talk time to see that I was making a genuine effort. But they still insisted the call count was the only thing that mattered. To clarify, a call only counted if someone picked up, or if it went to a voicemail that wasn't full. The system didn't register calls that didn't go through, such as numbers not in service, full voicemail boxes, or those that just rang with no answer. This meant that even if you made hundreds of attempts in a day, only a fraction of them would count. Everyone knew this, but the company didn't care. I was tired of the unfairness. It didn't help that the company was skimming our bonuses, which were provided by the department's client as a reward for successful debt collection. It became obvious when our bonuses turned into random numbers, even though they should have been multiples of 5. Frustrated by the company's apparent theft and lack of appreciation for successful collections, which was the whole point of the job, I decided to comply with the call count expectations without ever falling below the target again. I created a notepad file with a list of all the phone numbers that went straight to voicemail. These were often numbers where we were blocked, or where the owner had set their phone to away. From that point on, I made sure to make 15-20 calls per hour that would register, implying I was making even more calls than the system could see. I spread these calls out so my activity wouldn't raise any red flags and spent my day reading articles online. Naturally, the revenue I was generating dropped by about 80%. "Why aren't you collecting more?" they'd ask. "Well, manager," I'd reply, "you can see I'm surpassing my call count target, but my talk time is low, so I'm just not getting the opportunities to collect." It should be noted that the few accounts I was collecting from were easy ones, people who could and wanted to pay, who often called us. I relied on these inbound calls to make it seem like I was doing any work at all. Eventually, they started giving me lower value portfolios to work with, which was fine by me. They were stealing my bonuses, which were the only real incentive to do more than the bare minimum for a paycheck. So, why should I care? I honestly thought I was quietly quitting, but surprisingly, I developed a reputation as a valued member of the department. No one wanted to fire me, and I suppose they chalked up my lack of success to the poor portfolios they had assigned me. Stealing my bonuses and focusing on a target that should have been used to measure effort rather than as an absolute metric. I couldn't care less. I was getting paid to read all day. This continued for almost 2 years until I eventually had to leave the job for mental health reasons.